Everyone thinks The Sound of Music was pure harmony, sunshine, songs, and smiles. But behind the cameras, it was chaos. Christopher Plummer was drunk and miserable. Julie Andrews almost lost the role to 3 Hollywood icons. And studio executives were cutting deals that would rob the cast and the real Von Trapp family blind. So buckle up, because the story behind The Sound of Music is louder, darker, and far more shocking than the one they let us see. Fact 1. The real Maria wasn't in love at all. You think The Sound of Music is the ultimate love story, right? The sweet governess falls for the strict captain. They sing in the rain, escape over the mountains. Pure magic. But here's the twist. The real Maria Von Trapp once said, "I was not in love." Yeah. The woman whose romance melted hearts around the world didn't even marry for love. Maria confessed years later that she married Captain Georg Von Trapp because she adored his children. Not him. She went to their home as a tutor for one sick child, and before she knew it, she was standing at the altar, not out of passion but duty. "I really married the children," she said with brutal honesty. Can you imagine that? Hollywood gave us a fairy tale, but the truth was a woman who felt trapped between gratitude and confusion. The romance came much later, slowly and awkwardly. She admitted she grew to love him deeply, but not at first. She even laughed about it, saying, "I never danced in the moonlight in my life." Fact 2. Christopher Plummer hated the movie that made him famous. You know that calm, handsome father from The Sound of Music to Captain Von Trapp? Well, the man who played him, Christopher Plummer, absolutely despised the movie that made him a star. Yeah, you heard that right. While the rest of the world was falling in love with Julie Andrews spinning through the hills, Plummer was rolling his eyes and calling it The Sound of Mucus. He couldn't stand the sugar-sweet tone, the non-stop cheerfulness, or the way it painted him as a saintly father in suspenders. "It was so sentimental," he once said. "I nearly drowned in it." Every time someone on set sang another happy tune, he quietly muttered that he needed a drink, and he meant it. Most nights he'd sneak out to local taverns in Salzburg, drown his boredom in schnapps, and joke that even the nuns were acting happier than real people. However, he was supposed to play a grieving widower, cold, strict, broken by war. But the more he drank, the softer his performance became. When it came time to shoot Edelweiss, something shifted. The crew said his voice cracked, his eyes welled up, and for a second, it wasn't acting. That single scene became legendary. Decades later, even at elegant award dinners, people would hum Edelweiss in his presence, and he'd sigh, half laughing, half defeated. That damn movie follows me everywhere. Fact 3. The lake scene that almost turned deadly. Do you remember that cute moment where the Von Trapp kids fall into the lake? It looks like fun and laughter, but it almost ended in tragedy. The youngest actress, Kim Karath, who played Gretel, was just 5 years old. And here's the terrifying part. She couldn't swim. Julie Andrews was supposed to fall backward and catch her as they hit the water. But on the first take, Julie lost her balance and fell the wrong way, completely missing Gretel. Within seconds, the little girl disappeared under the surface, weighed down by her heavy costume. The cameras stopped. Crew members dropped everything and dove in. Andrews scrambled back up, panicked and crying, thinking she'd just watched the worst happen on her watch. Thankfully, one of the grips pulled Gretel out in time, coughing, shaking, terrified. They wrapped her in blankets, and within an hour they were back shooting again like nothing happened. But everyone on set remembered that day. The laughter you see in that scene? It was forced, covering up the shock that still lingered. The crew never forgot how close it came to disaster. Fact 4. The sweet song that came from a dying man. You know Edelweiss, that gentle little song that makes everyone tear up? It sounds like an old Austrian folk tune, something sung by shepherds for centuries. But the truth is darker. It was written by a dying man. Oscar Hammerstein II, the legendary lyricist behind The Sound of Music, was secretly battling stomach cancer while writing the final songs. He knew he didn't have long left, and Edelweiss was his farewell to life. He poured everything he had left into those few quiet verses. When Captain Von Trapp sings it in the film, saying goodbye to his homeland, audiences think it's a soldier's song. But it's really Hammerstein's goodbye to the world. His partner, Richard Rodgers, later said every time he heard that tune, he could still feel Oscar in the room. Only a few months after the Broadway debut, Hammerstein was gone. And yet, his final song outlived him. People still believe it's Austria's national anthem. It's not. It's one man's final prayer disguised as a lullaby. Every time you hear Edelweiss, remember, that's not just music. That's a man saying goodbye with grace, turning his last breath into something eternal. Fact 5. Julie Andrews almost lost the role of a lifetime. Here's something you probably never guessed. Julie Andrews, the woman who is The Sound of Music, almost didn't get the part. Seriously. Before she was even considered, Hollywood was chasing every big name they could find. Doris Day, Audrey Hepburn, even Grace Kelly, now Princess of Monaco. Each of them said no. Doris joked, "I'm no nun." Audrey said she was too old. So the studio hesitated. Julie had just done Mary Poppins, and executives thought she was too prim, too sweet, too safe. They were terrified audiences would roll their eyes. "Oh, look, another singing nanny." But then Walt Disney himself stepped in. He showed Poppins footage to Fox's producers and said, "Watch this woman light up a room." The moment they saw her smile, they knew. She wasn't just playing Maria. She was Maria. Still, it nearly fell apart again over a contract fight. Andrews thought about walking away, but fate had already chosen her. When the film hit theaters, she didn't just win the audience. She became the audience's heart. It was so funny. The studio once doubted she could carry the film. Turns out, she was the film. Fact 6. The storm that tried to destroy The Sound of Music. Everyone remembers Do Re Mi. Julie Andrews spinning through the hills, the kids laughing, the sunlight glowing over Salzburg. It looks like pure joy. But the truth was not like that. The entire sequence was a nightmare. The Alps weren't singing. They were fighting back. The weather in Salzburg changed by the minute. One morning, blue skies and calm winds. By lunch, thunder cracked across the valley, and the crew was running for cover. Costumes were drenched, cameras short-circuited. Julie Andrews joked later that she smelled like wet hay for weeks. The kids' shoes filled with water, and the sound team had to dry equipment by makeshift campfires just to keep filming. It got so bad that the editors had to Frankenstein the scene together. Footage from 5 different days, with skies jumping from bright blue to storm gray in a single cut. But you'd never know. The finished scene looks effortless, cheerful, like a burst of pure happiness. That's the magic. Every time the sun came out, everyone celebrated, knowing another storm was probably minutes away. Crew members said they were singing against the weather. By the time they wrapped the sequence, the production had lost days, money, and patience, but gained something priceless: authenticity. Fact 7. The night the city of Salzburg saw swastikas again. Here's something that still gives people chills. When the crew started filming the Nazi parade scenes, they hung enormous swastika banners across Salzburg's historic streets, real flags, flapping in the wind. Locals woke up and froze in shock. For them, it wasn't movie magic. It was trauma come back to life. Some people were so horrified that they called the police, thinking neo-Nazis had taken over the city again. Others broke down crying in the streets. Remember, this was just 20 years after World War II. The mayor demanded permits and strict supervision before filming could continue, but the damage was done. That day, the movie forced the city to look at its past through symbols. It reminded them of what had once been real. Even the actors felt the weight of it. Christopher Plummer later said that walking beneath those banners felt like history breathing down your neck. On screen, it became one of the film's most powerful images. Off-screen, it was a ghost the city couldn't ignore. Fact 8. The real Von Trapps lost everything. Everyone thinks The Sound of Music made the real Von Trapp family rich. A fairy tale ending, right? Nope. The truth hurts. In 1955, Maria Von Trapp sold the rights to her memoir for just $9,000. That's it. No royalties, no profit share, no Hollywood payday. She was so desperate at the time that she signed the papers without reading the fine print. When the movie exploded years later, grossing hundreds of millions, the Von Trapps received absolutely nothing. Maria said later, "I only wanted people to know our story." What she didn't realize was that Hollywood had bought not just her story, but her legacy. The film saved 20th Century Fox from bankruptcy, but the family that inspired it remained poor, singing at small halls and running a modest inn in Vermont. They watched Julie Andrews twirl through the mountains while tourists visited their story on screen. Maria once joked, half bitter, half proud, "At least our name is famous, even if our pockets are not." It's almost poetic. The movie about love and faith became one of the most profitable films ever made, yet the real people behind it lived quietly, far from fame. The Von Trapps didn't get the fortune. They got the memory. And sometimes, that's the cruelest part of fame. Fact 9. The film that saved a dying studio. In 1963, 20th Century Fox was in ruins. Cleopatra had bled it dry. Scandal, delays, and millions wasted. People called it the film that sank a studio. Executives were terrified. They were selling property, closing sound stages, and firing entire departments. Then a little script landed on their desks, a musical about a governess and 7 kids. Most laughed. A nun with a guitar? Who's gonna watch that? But one stubborn producer believed in it. And when The Sound of Music premiered in 1965, everything changed overnight. Audiences lined up around blocks. Theaters stayed packed for months. Critics sneered, but the box office didn't care. It became the highest-grossing film in history, beating Gone with the Wind. Fox, once on its knees, suddenly roared back to life. The film won 5 Oscars, including Best Picture, and single-handedly saved the studio from collapse. Staff who had been laid off were rehired, and for the first time in years, Hollywood smiled again. One journalist called it a miracle wrapped in melody. And maybe that's true. The movie about hope didn't just rescue a family in fiction, it rescued an entire industry. Fact 10. The scene that made the crew cry for real. There's one scene in The Sound of Music that still makes people choke up. Captain Von Trapp singing Edelweiss for the last time. You can feel his voice tremble, his eyes fill, and that silence in the air that's almost sacred. But what most don't know is that none of it was acting. It was real emotion. Christopher Plummer, who hated the movie more than anyone, came to set that day exhausted, hungover, and emotionally done. But when the music started, something broke inside him. Crew members said you could hear a pin drop. He wasn't playing a character anymore. He was a man letting go. When he sang that final note, tears rolled down his face. The director didn't cut right away. He let it breathe, capturing one of the most honest moments in film history. That's the take they used, the real one. Years later, Plummer admitted that was the only time he truly connected with the film. "I understood him," he said. a man losing everything he loved. And maybe that's why the scene still feels so raw. Fact 11. The scene that almost ended in blood. You remember that dreamy gazebo scene? 16 going on 17. Soft lights, innocent smiles, young love. Yeah, it wasn't so romantic behind the camera. Charmian Carr, who played Liesel, was only 21, dancing in heels on a slick, rain-soaked set. On the very first take, she leapt onto a bench, slipped, and crashed straight through a glass pane. The entire crew froze. Her leg was bleeding, her ankle was swollen like a balloon, but production couldn't stop. They wrapped her ankle so tight she could barely feel her foot. Every graceful spin you see in that scene, it's pure pain disguised as love. I was in agony, she admitted later, but I smiled through it. However, that scene became one of the most iconic in film history. Nobody knew it was born out of real suffering. Director Robert Wise told her, "You just gave the scene soul." Charmian never complained, but decades later she admitted the injury never fully healed. She couldn't watch the movie for years without remembering that crash. So next time you see Liesel twirling under the gazebo lights, remember, those weren't steps of joy. They were steps through pain, and immortalized by a single broken ankle. Fact 12. The dark version of The Sound of Music that almost happened. Before it became the bright, joyful classic we know, The Sound of Music was almost something completely different. Dark, political, and heartbreaking. The first director attached to the film wasn't Robert Wise. It was William Wyler, the Oscar-winning genius behind Ben-Hur. But Wyler wasn't interested in sunshine and singing nuns. He wanted to expose the horror of fascism, and his version would have changed movie history forever. Wyler himself was a refugee from Nazi Germany. He'd seen what real tyranny looked like, and he wanted The Sound of Music to show it. His vision was filled with fear, not joy. Rallies, salutes, flags, soldiers. He even told producers, "This isn't about songs, it's about survival." The Von Trapps wouldn't have danced in moonlight. They would have marched through shadows. He began scouting Salzburg, imagining the city drowning under Nazi banners. But then fate intervened. Wyler left to direct The Collector, and Fox brought in Robert Wise, who saw the story differently. Wise stripped away the terror and replaced it with warmth, family, and hope. The result? A film that healed instead of haunted. One that made the world sing instead of weep. But somewhere out there, in another timeline, there could have been a Sound of Music with no laughter, no love songs, only fear echoing through the mountains. Fact 13. The night the real and real Marias finally met. Years after The Sound of Music conquered the world, Julie Andrews finally came face to face with the real Maria von Trapp. It happened on the Julie Andrews Hour, and the studio audience had no idea what they were about to witness. When the two women stepped on stage together, one the Hollywood legend, the other the flesh and blood nun, the crowd gasped. Maria looked at Julie, smiled, and teased, "Your yodeling needs work." Julie burst out laughing, and suddenly they were both singing. Right there, unplanned, a duet that blurred the line between truth and myth. The audience was in tears. Two Marias, two worlds, one heartbeat. Afterward, Julie said meeting her was like touching the real story. Maria, who had lived through war, poverty, and fame, said she admired Julie's spirit. "She made my story sing." For a brief moment, the woman who inspired a legend stood beside the woman who became one. It was the perfect closing of a circle. The real Maria hearing her life turned into song, and Julie realizing she'd carried someone's soul without even knowing it. So, what do you think? Did The Sound of Music just lose its innocence for you, or does knowing the truth make you love it even more? Tell me in the comments. And if you love uncovering the real stories behind Hollywood's biggest classics, hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell, because next time the secrets get even darker.